Thanks for joining our session this morning. And Masson's Healthcare is proud to introduce the Brain Robotics Kneuro Knee. So I'll pass over to Brianne, who's one of the educators at Brain Robotics, and she will take us through the features and benefits of the Kneuro Knee. We'll keep all the microphones muted for now, other than Brianne's. And if you have questions, pop them in the chat, and we will address those throughout the session rather than waiting till the end. So as questions pop up, if you can put those in the chat, we will break throughout the session to address those. So with that said, I'll pass over to Brianne.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, Bill. Like Bill said, my name's Brianne. I lead the clinical team at Brain Robotics. We have been in the market over here in the US since about AOPA of last year, which was last September. We did a couple of pre-launch activities as well, but so far things are going really, really well. We're very excited for it, excited to introduce it to the Australian market, and really hope that maybe after this next hour, you guys feel just as excited as we do. Today, we're going to discuss the art of movement and really just introduce you guys into the Kneuro Microprocessor Knee. During today's presentation, we'll review a bit of background just on who Brain Robotics is. We'll go over some highlights, features and functions, and then reviewing the patient profile, exactly who the Kneuro is indicated for. And then I actually removed the Kneuro for you and how to kind of utilize Kneuro in your clinic, but we can discuss that and then just finishing up with some conclusions as well as some questions and answers then as well. So a little bit of background on Brain Robotics. So Brain Robotics has kind of been around for probably about 2 years now, going on 2 years, when we established kind of our global headquarters in Austin, Texas. However, our microprocessor knee project began way before that, back in 2021. So this has been kind of in the works at the Harvard Incubation Lab and MIT trained engineers. I mean, way before Brain Robotics was established as a company. So back in 2021, and that's kind of where this has come from. So it's Harvard and MIT engineers that had kind of cultivated and collaborated on the creation of this microprocessor knee. And then I guess going back one, like I said, we launched with PDAC approval in September of last year at the AOPA meeting in the US. And our goal, like we always like to start our presentations with our mission statement. And so our goal, and I think this is pretty universal for anyone in the prosthetics and orthotics field, but we strive to ignite the human spirit through advancements in bionic mobility. That's kind of where our passions lie. That's where we're very excited to kind of join the market, join the field, and just continue to push innovation forward. So going into some features and functions, I know L codes aren't exactly applicable for your market, but I do want to just draw attention to some of these. So it is a single access stance and swing phase control with stance extension dampening, microprocessor control with stance flexion and extension assist, as well as a manual lock. So manual lock and extension assist, those are kind of the heavy hitters, where the big conversations are more around in the US. And I think when we received our PDAC approval, we initially were like, yay, we have these 2 extra codes, whereas some of the competitors didn't necessarily have those. And so now where we felt like we were trailblazers, and now almost every microprocessor knee on the market has those extra codes. So again, understanding that the L codes aren't necessarily a big conversation for your market, but did want to just draw some attention to what those call outs are for billing in our market, assuming some of that may be applicable. But going into product specifications, so we have 9.15 inches for build height with a weight of 3.5 pounds and a weight limit of 330 pounds. Now we do offer two different color options. So one is a matte black and one is a little bit more of a pearl white. I believe I'll have a picture of the pearl white somewhere here in the presentation. Well, maybe not. But the pearl white is kind of like the shock and awe factor. There's a lot of black matte, kind of gunmetal gray knees on the market, whereas the pearl white really stands apart from all of the other competitors. We do have a single access hydraulic that is a default stance control. There's a proximal pyramid and a distal 30mm pylon receiver. So we have quite a long battery life of 5 days. It takes about 4 hours to fully charge the knee. And then we have a USB-C charge port. And I will say the USB-C charge port is something that kind of seems like the low-hanging fruit that a lot of the field that we've introduced this to is very excited about. A lot of the patients that we've introduced the USB-C charge port is very excited about. So that's been pretty fun and I think a little bit different. And then I think the 5-day battery life also just offers an advantage for our patients that are wearing the knee. So with the 5-day battery life kind of in the USB-C charger, I don't know how frequently it happens there, but there have been so many times as a clinician that I receive these urgent calls where the patient forgot their charger at home, their knee is about to die, and we need to figure out a way to overnight them a knee wherever their trip may take them. And so when those instances occur, it's just this very frantic moment of trying to negotiate with manufacturers and navigate their travel plans in order to get them that charger. And so now we're able to offer one of 5-day battery life with it, which is quite robust. And then two, almost everyone has that USB-C charge port on hand. And if they don't, they have one at the local convenience store that it's very easy to find one. So swing initiation. So swing initiation or stance release is going to include full extension, anterior tilt, and a forward progression. So these three things that occur very naturally as patients are kind of going through ambulation, right? We're not asking for them to kind of tap their head and rub their belly at the same time, but these three things are kind of standard across the board for microprocessor knees and really just ensure a safe progression as they translate from stance to swing phase. Now we also have an extension assist, and so this is one of the features that I think really pulls us apart from some of the competitors is we have this really robust mechanical spring assist. And so this enables for a reduction in energy expenditure. Now, like some of the verbiage I use here, I just want to maybe get ahead of myself and just saying we are currently working on research studies to kind of justify these claims further. What I'm talking about right now is more so anecdotal and just based off the feedback that we have in the field. We've done over 300 fittings in the US. And so just going off of some of the feedback that we've received from both patients and clinicians that have utilized this technology. Where we see this extension assist becoming very beneficial is for those new amputees and those lower mobility ambulators. So there are, several times us as CPOs, we're working in the parallel bars and as we're kind of guiding and instructing users to kick the ball, right? Kick the ball ahead of them, get that knee out in front of them in order to prepare for their next step. There's this like, yes, you got it. No, nope, do that again, right? And so there's all of this guidance that we're providing them. And what we see with this really robust extension assist is that that knee consistently gets out in front of them without much effort. And that knee is consistently out just in front of them. And so while I see this being beneficial for like the K3, K4 ambulators, just in the sense that they are able to walk further, faster, longer, I also see it being extremely beneficial for K2 because we're looking at consistency. We're looking at trying to improve their trust, trying to improve their gait patterns, trying to improve their strength and musculature. This knee is getting out in front of them every step of the way where they can confidently put their weight into it as they prepare for their next step. Now there's app-based configuration and app-based programming with the Kneuro. So we have opened it up in the Australia market. So if you want to download the app, there's 2 QRs at the top right-hand corner of the screen. Once you connect to the knee, so what this looks like, I guess, kind of long term, and maybe again getting a little bit ahead of myself, but also just trying to best prepare you for when you do fit a Kneuro. You will log into the app, you'll create your credentials, which actually you won't be able to do today, but if you go to our website, you'll be able to take an online course with the LMS. That will automatically certify you for the app on the back end. But you will create a patient profile, and in that patient profile, you will link a knee to that patient. And so each knee can only be utilized for one patient. Once the knee is connected, you'll plug in the knee center to floor, that maximum flexion angle, that safe mode resistance, and then you'll perform a static calibration. So knee center to floor, that's recorded in centimeters. Maximum flexion angle, that's just going to be how far back and in is that knee coming, and is there any interaction between the hydraulic and the socket or any of the adapters and the shell of the Kneuro. And then as you're programming safe mode resistance, this tends to be a bit higher than a lot of the competitors on the market. So it's a very stiff resistance, and that's a bit intentional, but it's something that we're maybe pulling back a little bit on, but it is a very stiff knee if the knee is out of battery or turned off. And then finally, you go into static calibration where the Kneuro doesn't require any unsafe walking. The Kneuro more so will, like, you hit the button and it will calibrate. However, it does need to be in full extension and the patient can't be moving. If the Kneuro detects any movement, it is very sensitive to that. It won't perform the calibration. So you can think of the calibration more so as the Kneuro is kind of setting that 0 range. And so just kind of re-identifying where 0 is for that patient. So if there's any socket flexion that's built in, and when the patient is quietly standing, it will be okay with up to 2 degrees of flexion set, and then set that to 0. So I hope that makes sense. All right, going into some of our programming parameters. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see what the app looks like and what those default parameters are. So initially we have this yielding resistance, and yielding resistance you can think of as stairs, chairs, and stumbles. So when I first put a microprocessor knee on a patient, the yielding resistance is the first thing I check. And so I'm checking and just making sure that they feel comfortable as they sit down in a chair. And then the next thing that we'll kind of go into is this yielding or this initial contact resistance. So what the initial contact resistance is more so for the stance flexion. So rather than like for a lot of patients that have maybe not quite as much control or they don't feel as comfortable with stance flexion, you can ramp up that yielding resistance or that initial contact resistance that will reduce some of their stance flexion and offer them more control and support. And then we have swing flexion angle. So as the patient is walking away from you, you can kind of monitor their heel rise and then adjust that swing flexion angle accordingly. So with swing flexion angle, this is something that I always recommend just making very minor adjustments to, and allowing the patient to get used to it, and then making more adjustments as needed. So when I say minor adjustments, I would say between 1 to 2 degrees of change. Maybe 2 degrees of change is good if you're noticing a significant change is needed. But just noting that this is going to influence swing flexion, right? So if you reduce that a dramatic amount, so our default angle is at 65 degrees. If you reduce that 10 degrees to 55, that knee is going to reach full extension at a much sooner point, and that can induce more of a trip hazard for the patient because their leg is now inherently longer during an earlier point of swing phase. So just keeping that in mind. And then extension resistance. So extension resistance, this is going to be active in both stance and swing phase. But for extension resistance, you're going to evaluate really how quickly that knee is coming out in front of the user. And then we have stair ascent extension resistance. So one of the features with the Kneuro is going to be step over step stair ascent. And this is a much more minor gait pattern and movement pattern than users are often used to. And so with some of the competitors on the market, it's a very aggressive kind of donkey kick movement pattern, whereas with the Kneuro, we're able to be a bit more minute with our movement patterns. But what I will say, and just for you as clinicians to keep in mind, is anyone that is learning a brand new movement pattern, they tend to be very aggressive with it and have a really broad range of movement. So as users become more experienced, you can start to dial that in and really narrow down that movement pattern. But initially, I tend to find that extension resistance, I want to turn it up a little bit more just because I find that the movement pattern that our users are exhibiting is a little bit more aggressive. So with that, with their movement pattern, with momentum, with the extension assist, they tend to kick that step ahead of them just a little bit more frequently. So this enables you or enables your user to really appropriately place their foot on the stair and then confidently put their weight into it and step over it. So the Kneuro does have stumble recovery. So if swing phase extension is interrupted, the Kneuro will automatically resort to that high resistance yield by engaging the programmed yielding resistance. Pardon me, stumbled over my words a little bit. So it will resort to that high resistance yielding resistance that that you have programmed kind of initially. So again, that's stairs, chairs, and stumbles. So as the patient's sitting down, as they are going downstairs, and if they were to encounter a stumble, the yielding resistance will be active. Now, stance lock. So if the patient stands at anywhere in between 20 and 40 degrees for 2 seconds, the knee will resort to completely blocked flexion. Now, extension is still free rein. So as the patient wants to stand up and continue on their day, they absolutely can. That's more of a safety thing. We want to make sure that users can obviously get out of this stance lock with no issues. But think of this as a way to offload the sound limb. And so if users are leaning against a wall, leaning against a railing, waiting for their kids to get out of school, standing in line at the grocery store, they can put a little bit of flexion in the knee, put their weight into it, and have complete confidence that that knee is going to support them. Now on the Kneuro, we do have a control button. And so this control button offers 3 different functions: a power on off with a long 8-second press and hold, a manual lock with a short 2-second press and hold, and then a quick access mode selection with a double tap of that button. So that button is proximally located, it's very tactile, so it's easy to find, and it's always on the right side of the knee. So there's no laterality to our knees, but I mean, it's always going to be on the right side. It's not necessarily medial or lateral, but we do find that there's a lot of functionality to it, and that users are very pleasantly surprised and use it quite often. Now for activity modes, so we have two pre-programmed activity modes with the Kneuro. So we have cycling and golf, as well as custom A, B, and C. So there's 5 different activity modes that you can program with the Kneuro. Now just noting that all of these have to be enabled by the clinician. This is more so a safety factor for our patients. The last thing we want anyone to do is to be tapping around on the app and just accidentally hit cycling mode and all of a sudden the knee gives out when they're in a compromised position. So we were very aware of that as we were kind of programming this and wanting to make sure that the clinicians enable all of these modes before the patients have access to them. Now, there's 2 different kind of versions of the app. So both are downloaded via the App Store. They're iOS and Android compatible, but with different logins, the patient has an app and the clinician has an app. So this is a little bit of what the clinician, or pardon me, what the patient side of the app looks like. So you can see battery life, you can see step count, you can turn the audible sounds off and on. As well as select up to any of those 5 different modes. So when any of those modes are selected, you can program one of them for a quick access mode. So you can see on the bottom right hand side of the screen where that toggle is enabled. And so there is cycling mode in there. And so it's just a quick a press and hold and then drag that specific mode into quick access. And now when the patient goes into their knee, they can double tap their knee and change the mode. And so they have the ability to change these modes or change the quick access modes. So they can change their modes 2 different ways. They can change it via the app or they can change it via quick access. Now again, quick access, they have the option to change that at any time. So for instance, if you have an avid cycler, he cycles every single day, it obviously makes sense for cycling to be his quick access mode. But next week he is getting ready to go on a golf trip. So for next week, maybe he wants golf to be his quick access mode selection. Wanting to hop into some of the patient profiles. So as we're discussing kind of patient characteristics, for K2s, K3s, K4s, they are all indicated for use with the Kneuro. So we've had really great success in fitting all 3 of those patient populations. So for the K2 population, you can think about kind of that extension assist, enabling them to walk a little bit further, walk confidently, walk a little bit faster. For the K3, K4 population, as I had mentioned earlier, we're kind of enabling them to walk further, faster, longer, and continue throughout their day. So where I see this fitting in with your patients, we have really active patients that have mentioned that they now feel enabled to keep up with their peers. So maybe put yourself in the mind of you as a 21-year-old that just had an amputation, a traumatic amputation above the knee. For those patients, they no longer have to ask their friends to slow down and to take a break for them. They're able to keep up with their peers throughout the day, which I think is a really exciting and really just encouraging thing that we're able to offer the more active populations. For unilateral and bilateral patients, we've also had really great success. So I think unilateral being a little bit more basic and bilateral maybe being the one that we should focus on. But for bilateral patients, where we see the Kneuro kind of thriving in this market is, again, with that ease of stance release as well as that extension assist. So that extension assist, being as robust as it is, really enables our users to consistently get that knee out in front of them. And for that bilateral population, they're encountering less gait deviations because that knee is getting out in front of them consistently. And so I think that's where we can talk more about energy efficiency for that market and that population, is just because the patients that we're serving are able to walk with a reduction in energy expenditure, and just improved gait dynamics, improved confidence, and get that knee out in front of them consistently. What we've also noticed with that population is that they're able to traverse down ramps and down hills with more confidence and more consistency. So we've had, again, anecdotally, we've had users that feel much more confident with the support the hydraulic is providing them and the range that it's providing it, when bilateral users are ambulating down a ramp. Now, knee disarticulation through to a hemipelvectomy. And so again, with this population, we're inquiring about those gait deviations. So looking at vaulting for hemipelvectomies or a lateral shift, a lateral lean. We're seeing much more consistent gait patterns as that knee is transitioning from stance to swing phase. Much more consistent heel rise as that knee kind of kicks out in front of them and they're able to confidently put their weight into the prosthesis for that next step. So again, I mean, knee disarticulation, that's really just going to be the long length of their residual limb, whereas as you move your way up, so kind of a AK or a classic AK versus a hip disarticulation or a hemipelvectomy, it gets a bit more complicated as those amputation levels get higher. We also have a weight limit of 330 pounds. So the patient characteristic that we are looking for is under a 330-pound weight limit. In the US market, K2 has been a very big conversation just as our legislation has recently changed in the last 6 months. And so this has been a very hot topic for us. And so wanted to just bring it up and kind of differentiate between the two, well, I guess the three different activity levels that we're meeting. So for the K2 patient population, we have an advanced algorithm that releases consistently with even the smallest steps. And so what this enables patients to do is just accomplish those ADLs. So whether it's working in their kitchen, in their garden, in kind of those tight, or maybe even think about the laundry room. Like accomplish those activities of daily living, as well as reduce our energy expenditure because it doesn't require too much of a lift in order for that, that stance release to kind of read and then release. This also is just helping to prevent injury as the patient doesn't have to maneuver any really strong, strong movement patterns, but it's very natural. And then also just anticipating kind of that next step, that knee is getting out in front of them with a lot of consistency. And so that consistency will just enable the user to build more confidence, more strength over time. Now our extension assist, so we have a mechanical spring assist, and this really just enables, again, that reduction in energy expenditure. And so that's kind of been a topic I've hit on recurrently throughout this conversation, but one that I really want to hit home because I think it's a big differentiator for us between other competitors on the market. Now we do also have stumble recovery, which is an automatic high resistance if that swing phase extension is interrupted. So stumble recovery is enabling us to reduce some of that fall risk and as well as reduce and prevent any further injury to the patient. Now with stumble recovery, I usually describe this as it's either going to prevent the fall completely or it's going to help the user prepare for the fall, right? So what that high resistance does is it's enabling the user to put their weight into the device and buying them time to get that sound leg out in front of them in order to help hopefully prevent the fall completely. Or if not, it's slowing the fall down so it's not as much of a faceplant maneuver as it is maybe they drop to their knees and then they have their hands out in front of them, but they just have time to prepare for that fall. And then the last thing I want to touch on here is yielding limiter. And so what this does is, if you recall back to that initial contact resistance, the that resistance can be you can override that resistance with this yielding limiter. And so we have 3 different gradients of it. And so we have low, medium, and high. And what this does is, rather than for your K2 population, maybe aligning out completely any ability for stance flexion, you can utilize this yielding limiter that will enable them to gradually over time improve their confidence, improve their strength, and start to utilize more of that stance flexion. So with stance flexion, we all know that it's such a big benefit for our patients, and one that we would love to see every patient utilize, as it's going to be that that kind of shock absorption within the body, and it's going to prevent that force going, or it's going to prevent that force from translating from the knee through the prosthetic socket into the pelvis, into the spine, and make for a much more comfortable gait. So the yielding limiter will increase that flexion resistance and just ensure that the user feels supported throughout stance phase. So you can look at this as enhanced stability, reducing fall risk, and preventing further injury. Now, as we discuss some K3, K4 patient benefits, now the ease of release as well as the extension assist are still going to be a hot topic of conversation here. But 2 things that I want to draw your attention to is we have step over step stair ascent as well as walk to run. So step over step stair ascent is going to be a specific movement pattern. It's very similar to others that you are likely familiar with the X3 or with the Rio XC or maybe even the Quattro. So it's kind of a donkey kick pattern, but it's a much more minute pattern, movement pattern, and a much more natural movement pattern that like to walk step over step. So, and then once the user puts their foot on the stair, flexion resistance is ramped up, and this will just help support the user kind of as gravity and leverage starts acting upon their leg. And then, as discussed earlier, there's an adjustable extension resistance that will just enable the user to properly position their foot on the step in order to ensure that they're ready to kind of lift themselves up and over. Important to note here that this is not a powered knee. It is just one that's providing more resistance as the user is coming up over the step, but they will still have to fire those hip flexors and hip extensors, pardon me, to get themselves up and over the step. And then we also have walk to run. So with walk to run, so one thing I want to call out here, and I guess it's also relevant for step over step stair ascent, but there is no load sensor within the knee. And so what the knee is evaluating is just that amount of time spent in stance. And so as users increase their cadence, they're reducing their time in stance phase. As they do that, so what this translates to is about 6 kilometers per hour or 4 miles per hour. But it's extension, immediately once they hit that extension resistance is decreased. So this has been really easy for users to activate and very seamless for them to activate walk to run. As we are thinking about walk to run and kind of including it in your practice and including it in your clinic, we don't necessarily view this as an activity that is only for military. And I guess maybe this is a slightly different conversation when we kind of talk about the Australian market, because I think you guys see quite a few more X3s or Rio XCs over there than we do here in the States, whereas that technology was really established for active duty military. And so whereas right now we're trying to push the field, and we think of this more as a basic human right that everybody needs, because if you think about playing outside with your dog and playing fetch, or running to get your kid, or running to play with your kid, or running to stop your child from running into the street, those are all really important things. Or running to catch a plane or running to catch a bus. Any of those conversations, you need a knee that keeps up with you. And so we're really excited to be able to offer these to kind of all populations, all activity levels. Now getting into more of the complex cases. So fitting hips, hemis, short transfemorals, bilateral amputations. I want to highlight this advanced algorithm that releases even with small steps, right? And so a lot of the conversations that we had regarding the K2 populations, they're going to be still relevant here for the more complex cases. The mechanical spring into full extension is just going to enable a reduction in energy expenditure. Stumble recovery has this automatic high resistance if swing phase extension is interrupted, and then yielding limiter. So this is an increased flexion resistance during early stance. And again, this can be very relevant for the bilateral, for the transfemoral or the short transfemoral, or the hips or hip disarticulations or hemipelvectomies. All right, so lastly, as we kind of conclude our presentation, I just want to go over some of these key takeaways. So we do have a control button on the right side of the Kneuro. It's very tactile, it's easy to reach, it's easy to activate. Again, this offers 3 different functions. So it offers an on-off switch with a long hold, a manual lock with a 2-second hold, or a quick access mode selection for one different custom mode. We do have step over step stair ascent, so users are able to climb stairs step over step with a much more seamless and natural gait pattern. We have walk to run that activates as the users are reaching a cadence of more than 6 kilometers per hour. USB-C charge port, so this just enables really quick and easy charging. We have this advanced microprocessor control that really will just enable further programming and intelligent kind of activation. 5-day battery life, a 330-pound weight limit, as well as an IP67 water rating. So that's something that we didn't super touch on during this presentation, but wanting to draw your attention to it. So IP67 water rating is to a depth of 1 meter for 30 minutes in freshwater only. So it's important to note that the knee is not corrosion resistant. If there are any emergencies where patients fall into the knee or there may be splashed with it, I would just recommend rinsing the knee off with fresh water. And then again, kind of a 3.5-pound weight limit, default stance, control mechanisms, 9.15 build height, and then it comes in black and white color selections.
Brianne, I have a question related to osseointegration, which is quite or becoming more common here in Australia. Yeah. What's been the experience on the Kneuro with osseointegration?
I think it's a great question. I think that's one we're continuing to kind of test the market for. We've had really good success with several patients with OI, but it's one that I would always recommend a trial prior to a delivery. But the feedback so far has been pretty good.
Brianne, we may just ask to clarify the charging time.
4 hours from completely empty to completely full. Now that is with our charging block. So obviously I can't, like if you opt to use a different charging block, I can't say how long it will take. It will just depend on like the watts, the amps. But our charging block, I believe, is 10 amps. And it takes 4 hours to fully charge.
Thank you to everyone who attended, and thank you to Brianne for being available late in her day over in the US.
No problem. Thank you all for attending. Thanks for setting this up.
All right.
Bye.